Welcome to Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer. Disinformation, a crucial, much-discussed measure intended to misdirect the enemy. Disinformation can obfuscate judgment and cause errors in assessment, anticipation, and planning, thereby creating opportunities for aggressive action. It can effectively depress the enemy's combat spirit and persuade opponents to forego imminent actions or adopt new tactics. Rumors can be employed in an ancillary role to agitate people and cause panic, especially when they exploit persistent fears. In short, deception is a curse, but it has manifold manifestations, and it's a lever of power. Before beginning, we should distinguish misinformation, which can have a random character, be spontaneously generated, and generally causes confusion, from disinformation, which has a deliberate objective and is structured to achieve predetermined goals. Now, many means have historically been utilized to deliver false information, including Swinzer's aptly named disinformation agents and his double agents and dead agents. Defectors, whether real or feigned and duped. Rumors and prophetic sayings. Forged letters. Leaked plans. Accidentally discovered documents, escaped prisoners, and even unwitting emissaries. In addition, discussions of contemplated possibilities, public announcements of intended policies, and the apparent issuance of military directives, as well as privately held discussions and maybe the confidential conveyance of secret information, they have all frequently proven effective. Even just shifting the emphasis, conveying an impression without actually saying anything, stressing one aspect while maintaining silence about others, and alternatively asserting and denying, rephrasing or reinterpreting, even concealing, marginalizing. All these have been successful. Individuals that have been duped into unknowingly conveying deceptive information include garrulous members of the court, diplomats fed false data, prisoners allowed to overhear secret plans before supposedly managing to escape, spies detected through counterintelligence efforts who are tricked with false documents, or they're allowed to witness facades, and of course deliberately misled double agents of dubious loyalty, as we discussed in our spy talks. Conscious of the potential benefits of disinformation, commanders in China and the West frequently resorted to it. Even when it's powerful enough to accomplish significant objectives by itself, confirming its veracity with appropriate actions, such as a feigned retreat, always increases the likelihood of success. And as a deliberately conceived and carefully executed measure, disinformation is already visible in the Western Zhou in China, and thereafter reflecting its emergence as a significant technique in the late spring and autumn period, a period of internecine warfare. The art of war entrusts expendable spies with the task of spreading disinformation in its infamous chapter on clandestine agents. And at least in part because of the art of war's influence, China thereafter has a long heritage of implementing disinformation measures. According to the Warring States writing The Six Secret Teachings, the commander's general staff should include 2 officers of techniques, who we've mentioned before. They're responsible for spreading slander and falsehoods, and for calling on ghosts to confuse the minds of the populace. And slightly later, the 3 strategies advise that commanders should spread false words and cause the enemy to make errors. The Song Dynasty, 100 Unorthodox Strategies, well summarizes the thrust under the rubric of utterances. Quoting, "In warfare, utterances refer to specious statements. For example, if you speak about attacking the East but instead strike the West, if you target those but attack these, you cause the enemy's forces not to know where to prepare their defenses. As a result, the location you attack will invariably be undefended." Thereafter, the Hu Chenjin echoed the 6 secret teachings when it asserted that supernatural should be turned to advantage. Quote, have those who talk about the unnatural and speak deceptively, way, which we've encountered before, who excel at magnifying and terrifying with ghosts and spirits, and who expound the dictates of heaven, proclaim them in order to delude the masses and thereby affect the enemy's mind. The Warring States political philosopher Han Feize, who turned his attention to the dynamics of persuasion, he realized credibility was a question of accretion and that multiplicity establishes veracity. In an insight crucial to disinformation, he concluded, quote, words act in such a way that their credibility stems from greater numbers. Something untrue, if reported by 10 men, is still doubted. By 100, it's taken to be so. And by 1,000, it becomes irrefutable. 2 millennia later, the Yuncho Gongmu concluded, quote, according to an ancient adage, when one dog barks at something, 100 dogs bark at the sound. It's also said when one person passes something along, it's vacuous, but 100 people transmitting it makes it substantial. Probably the human mind is easily deluded, and rumors are enough to move the masses. The Chinese, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, and other antique peoples were particularly skillful at disseminating falsehoods through pseudo-defectors who had been insulted or dismissed, even deliberately subjected to severe physical punishment, even though their proclaimed motives would continue to be disaffection, rewards, and a desire to shift allegiance. A few hapless individuals were subjected to severe physical punishment and what came to be known as the ploy of suffering or of bitter flesh, kuroji, in methods that we discussed in the talks on spies and intelligence. Now, in typically arcane fashion, the 36 stratagems outlines the ploy's psychological underpinnings. Quote, people do not harm themselves, so if they suffer injury, it will certainly be genuine. Estrangement can be effected by making the false true and the true false. Since any wound could cause death in a pre-antibiotic age, and mutilation and pain would be experienced long beyond the initial moment of disgrace, great courage was required to subject yourself to such suffering, and extreme determination needed to endure it thereafter while continuing to focus on the objective. Nevertheless, China's practice of the ploy of kuroji verges on the incomprehensible. Not only were individuals severely tortured and maimed, their family members were also entangled and perished. The apparent quest for revenge made experienced military leaders with detailed knowledge of enemy practices and weaknesses so welcome that they were sometimes accorded great power, particularly after suffering the ploy of bitter flesh. If Yi Yin, who we talked about early on, is recognized as the first such pseudo-victim because King Tang of the Shang shot him in the shoulder with an arrow. China's heritage of exposing agents to imperial criticism, public disgrace, imprisonment, corporal mutilation, and banishment to establish the veracity of their cover stories stretches back 4,000 years. In addition, contrary to all reason, assassins in China often resorted to extreme self-inflicted injuries to accomplish their missions. Perhaps the most famous and undoubtedly the most important use of the ploy of suffering flesh brought about Cao Cao's ignominious defeat at Red Cliffs on the Yangtze River in 208 AD. His naval forces had vastly outnumbered the combined strength of Wu and Han, the other two kingdoms, then tenuously amassing power in a quest to gain total ascendancy. But the seasickness experienced by his northern troops prompted him to lash the vessels together and tether them to the shore to minimize their undulation. This immediately made them vulnerable to a waterborne incendiary attack. Huang Gai, an accomplished Wu commander, enacted the role of a disgraced general who wished to defect to Cao Cao, and thereby he gained unimpeded access. His carefully planned assault employed 10 large vessels filled with combustible materials soaked in oil. This is pre-gunpowder days, so you had to use oil and other inflammables, sulfur. And the boats supposedly carried provisions that he had seized and planned to provide to the Northerners. And behind them, he trailed small, swift boats for the crews to escape. Although the exact circumstances concocted to establish Huang's credibility are unknown, he was apparently berated for command failures, insulted, degraded, maybe even physically beaten. All developments certain to be reported to Cao Cao by his own spies. However, being the art of war's first known commentator, Cao Cao should have been cognizant of Sun Tzu's warning about proffered surrenders. Nevertheless, perhaps enticed by the prospect of badly needed supplies, he permitted himself to be persuaded about the offer's genuineness. After Huang launched their boats, the wind became favorable and then fortuitously grew stronger, magnifying the speed of the vessels and their impact, as well as the intensity of the ensuing fires. A great conflagration followed, land attacks increased the casualties, and Cao Cao's forces were decimated, compelling him to flee with just remnants of his cavalry. The astonishing defeat of his massive army and the fiery destruction of his extensive flotilla of ships at Shirpi thwarted his ambitions and his hope of consolidating power over the realm, changing the course of Chinese history. Now, escaped prisoners, local guides, the disgruntled and disaffected, spies who apparently managed to escape. These were all used to convey false information for military purposes. For example, when the great but ultimately ill-fated Song patriot UFA was battling Cao Cheng's vastly superior rebel force of more than 100,000 in 1132 AD, his troops happened to capture one of Cheng's spies, and they left him tied out outside Phase 10. UFA eventually came out to purportedly inquire about their provisions. Being advised that they were exhausted, he announced they would shift their position, and then he further enhanced his performance by looking toward the spy with an apparently vacant stare before he shuffled back into his tent. Naturally, the spy escaped by design and informed Cheng, who accepted the report's veracity and set his own forces into motion. Ultimately, although he had only 8,000 troops, UFA exploited Cheng's destabilization and put him to flight through imaginatively conceived fervent attacks. Now, while their information may prove to be valuable, the military writings such as the Tai Bai Yin Jing, Wu Jing Zong Yao, and Wu Bei Zhi all stress that the reliability of escaped prisoners has to be questioned. Moreover, observing that escape from true confinement is virtually impossible, the Cao Lu Jingle warns the information provided by escapees is almost certainly bogus. Quote, when someone is a prisoner in the tiger's den, it's truly impossible to escape. If they should learn something and then manage to escape, it's absolutely certain the enemy wants to mislead us. Even so, the Hu Chenjin optimistically advises, quote, when you capture enemy prisoners, leak some false plans, and then secretly allow them to escape, thereby causing the enemy to trust in their validity. Since your actions will differ, you'll be employing the enemy's soldiers as your agents. Moreover, the Hu Chenjing envisions an exploitable opportunity for astute commanders, even in false information. Quote, if, based upon what we have heard, we fathom their intentions and employ unorthodox measures that accord with the situation, we will never fail to be victorious. However, only perspicacious generals can mislead people with affairs. In contrast, actual deserters and contingents that suddenly defect to the enemy pose a double threat. On the one hand, they might possess critical information about the army's plans or its weaknesses, and on the other, their loss can dishearten the troops. Fortunately, disinformation measures designed to cast doubt upon their motives and reliability, ranging from prompt battlefield pronouncements that provide a new interpretation of events, through rumors and letters intended for capture, offer a solution, making it seem their defection is feigned, that they've been deliberately dispatched for subversive purposes, including acting as spies or fifth columnists, proves particularly effective. This diminished the adverse impact within the army and also tended to result in the dissidents' deaths once their opponents became convinced their defection was merely a charade. It could be achieved by having pseudo-defectors raise suspicions, planting false information about their purpose with known enemy agents, or dispatching supposedly secret communications with incriminating instructions or information. When the missives are intercepted, the deserters inevitably fall under suspicion or are seized, nullifying the threat. As always, thank you for watching.